Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku became the prototype hero. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air was thin and sharp atop the sterile rooftop of the Takoba Municipal Building. It whipped Izuku Midoriya's dark green hair into his eyes, the same way it tugged at the ludicrously sharp bangs of the man standing before him. The man who was, in every conceivable way, his entire world. All Might. The setting sun painted the Muzutafu skyline in bruised purples and blazing oranges, a backdrop of impossible beauty for the ugliest moment of Izuku's life. His question, the one he had hitched a ride on a hero's leg and climbed a dozen flights of stairs to ask, still hung in the air between them, fragile as a spider's thread. So, can I be a hero, even without a quirk? The silence that followed was a physical thing. It was heavier than the concrete beneath his worn red sneakers. It was colder than the wind biting at his cheeks. All Might's signature smile, the one that calmed civilians and terrified villains, was gone. In its place was a look of profound, almost paternal weariness. The hero's colossal form seemed to cast a shadow that swallowed Izuku whole. Without a quirk, All Might repeated, his voice, usually a booming declaration of hope, was now a low, somber rumble. He looked away, his gaze sweeping over the city he protected. A city of millions, 99.9% of whom had some form of superpower. A city where the quirkless were a rounding error, a relic. No, the word was not a shout. It was not cruel. It was quiet, firm, and absolute. It was a surgeon's scalpel, cutting away a diseased hope with clean, devastating precision. Izuku's world, which had been teetering on a precipice of possibility, simply fell. He felt the impact in his chest, a hollow thud that stole his breath. His hands, clutching the straps of his yellow backpack, went numb. The hero analysis for the future, number 13 notebook, tucked safely inside, suddenly felt like a tombstone. All Might turned back to him, his expression pained. He saw the boy's spirit crumble, saw the light in his wide, hopeful eyes flicker and die. He felt a pang of guilt so sharp it rivaled the ache in his side. Look, kid. I'm sorry. I can't just give you a simple yes and a pat on the back. That would be a lie, and a dangerous one. He raised a hand, gesturing to the streets below, where the distant wail of a siren was a constant, mournful song. Being a hero isn't just about stopping street-level thugs. It's a profession, a dangerous, brutal, and often thankless one. He took a step closer, his sheer size an intimidating reality. We fight villains whose quirks can level city blocks. We run into fires that melt steel. We face threats that are faster than bullets, stronger than bulldozers. When a hero arrives on the scene, they have to make a split-second assessment. Can I contain this? Can I survive this? Almost every time, the answer to that question relies on the tool you were born with. Your quirk. He let his words sink in, the cold logic of them a relentless tide against Izuku's sandcastle dream. You see our flashy fights on the news. All Might continued, his tones softening with pity. But you don't see the paperwork. The risk assessments. The casualty reports. You don't see the heroes who burn out, who are crippled, who died because their quirk had a weakness the villain exploited. It's not a game. It's a war fought in inches and seconds. To go into that war intentionally unarmed, it's not heroic. It's suicide, he sighed, a sound like grinding stones. You have a heroic spirit, kid. I saw it back there. You were brave. But that spirit needs a vessel strong enough to carry it. Without a quirk, you'd be a liability. You'd be one more civilian we'd have to save. Each word was another nail in the coffin. A liability. The thing he wanted to prevent, he would become. The silence returned, this time filled with Izuku's ragged, silent breaths. Tears welled, hot and thick, blurring the magnificent sunset into a meaningless smear of color. So, it's impossible, Izuku whispered, the words tasting like ash. All Might's face was a mask of regret. If you want to help people, there are other ways. You could become a police officer. They get a lot of flack, but they're good people who do necessary work. You could be a doctor, a paramedic. They save lives every single day. He placed a heavy, gentle hand on Izuku's shoulder. The touch felt like a branding iron of failure. It's not a bad thing to dream, kid, but you have to be realistic. With that, he turned, crouched, and the muscles in his legs bunched like steel cables. I have to get this guy to the police, he said, patting the pocket where the sludge villain was now contained in a soda bottle. Stay safe. And with a thunderous clap that echoed across the rooftop, he was gone. A concussive blast of wind was the only proof he had ever been there. Izuku stood alone. The wind howled in his ears, a mocking laugh. He slowly sank to his knees, the rough texture of the concrete grating against his uniform trousers. He couldn't feel it. He couldn't feel anything but a vast, yawning emptiness where his dream used to be. For 15 years, it had been the sun in his sky, the air in his lungs, the beat of his heart. And the number one hero, his idol, his god, had just snuffed it out. The walk home was a blur of detached misery. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of quirks and possibilities, was now just a collection of gray buildings and blurry faces. Izuku's feet shuffled along the pavement, each step an effort. He didn't even remember walking down the stairs from the rooftop. One moment he was kneeling in despair, the next he was on the street, the sounds of the city a dull, meaningless drone. He passed under a familiar underpass, the same one where his day had taken its first disastrous turn. He absently kicked a discarded plastic bottle, the sound echoing in the concrete tunnel. Be realistic. All Might's voice was a cruel ghost in his head. What was realistic for a quirkless nobody? A desk job? Filing paperwork while others, the chosen ones, did the real work? An explosion rocked the air. Izuku flinched, startled out of his stupor. Smoke was pluming into the sky just a few blocks ahead. A crowd was gathering, their voices a cacophony of fear and excitement. Against his better judgment, his feet started moving, a Pavlovian response honed by years of chasing hero fights. He pushed through the throng of people, his shorter stature making it difficult to see. Then he saw it. The sludge villain. The same one All Might had captured. The bottle must have fallen from his pocket during his takeoff. A cold dread, sharp and acidic, washed over Izuku. This was his fault. The villain was a churning, amorphous mass of foul green liquid, eyes and a grotesque mouth swirling in the chaos. And trapped within it, suffocating, was a student. Izuku's blood ran cold when he saw the spiky blonde hair and the familiar, furious red eyes. Katsuki Bakugo. The heroes on the scene were struggling. Empty Lady was too big to navigate the narrow street. Kamui Woods was useless against a liquid enemy, and the entire area was now on fire from Bakugo's explosive attempts to free himself, making his wood-based quirk a liability. The water-manipulating hero, Backdraft, was busy containing the fires, and Death Arms was trying to clear civilians, his super strength ineffective against the villain's fluid body. Izuku's mind, the one he had spent over a decade training, kicked into overdrive. It was an automatic, instinctual process. He wasn't thinking as a fan anymore. He was analyzing a problem. Villain composition, liquid, viscous. Weakness, unknown, possibly solidification or dispersion. Hostage is volatile. His quirk is creating splash damage and spreading the fires. Heroes present are mismatched. Death Arms can't get a grip. Kamui Woods is a fire hazard. Empty Lady is geographically locked. They're waiting for someone with the right quirk. He heard the whispers in the crowd. Why aren't they doing anything? They can't. Look at the situation. They're waiting for the right hero. And then, Izuku's eyes met Bakugo's. For a split second, through the churning sludge, he saw not the usual arrogance and anger, but raw, primal terror. Bakugo, the prodigy, the one who was always strong, was drowning. His eyes were pleading, and Izuku's legs moved. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a thought. It was a pure, unadulterated instinct. The world narrowed to a tunnel. The shouts of the crowd, the warnings of the heroes, "Hey, stop! Get back here, you idiot!" faded into a dull roar. All he could see was Bakugo's terrified face. His backpack, his heavy, nerdy backpack, suddenly felt like a tool. He swung it off his shoulder as he ran, a desperate, unplanned maneuver. He reared back and threw it with all his might. The bag spun through the air and slammed into the villain's massive form. It wasn't the bag itself that did anything, but the contents. A heavy textbook, a metal pencil case. They struck one of the villain's huge, liquid eyes. The villain roared, momentarily distracted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Bakugo managed to gasp for a precious lungful of air. Izuku didn't stop. He was at the villain's edge now, his red shoes sinking into the foul-smelling ooze. He started clawing at the sludge, his fingers digging uselessly into the slimy mass. It was pathetic. It was hopeless. He knew it was. But he couldn't stop. Kaken! He screamed, his voice raw. What the hell are you doing, Deku? Bakugo choked out, fury mixing with his fear. Get away! I don't know! Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. My legs, they just started moving. I couldn't just stand there and watch you die. He looked into Bakugo's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see a bully. He saw a kid who was scared. You looked like you were asking for help, Izuku sobbed, still clawing, still trying. It was in that moment of pure, selfless, reckless heroism that a voice boomed from behind them, a sound that was both a promise and a judgment. I really am pathetic. Izuku glanced back. All Might, in his full, magnificent form, stood there, his face a grimace of self-recrimination. He had been lecturing on pragmatism while this boy, this quirkless, powerless boy, was living the very definition of a hero. Detroit smash. The world became wind and pressure. All Might's punch wasn't aimed at the villain. It was aimed at the air above him. The force of the blow was so immense it created a localized weather system. A powerful updraft tore the sludge villain apart, splattering him into harmless droplets. The fires were extinguished in an instant, and then, the sky opened up. It began to rain. Izuku fell to the pavement, drenched and shaking, the adrenaline leaving him as quickly as it had come. He had been saved. They both had. But the feeling wasn't relief. It was a profound, bone-deep shame. The professional heroes quickly swarmed in, securing the villain and checking on Bakugo. Izuku, on the other hand, was pulled aside and given a stern, thorough scolding. Are you insane, kid? Death Arms demanded, his face stern. You could have gotten yourself killed. You didn't help. You just added another civilian to the list of people we had to worry about. There's a difference between bravery and recklessness, Kamui Woods added, his wooden arms crossed. Your stunt was the latter. Leave the hero work to the professionals. Izuku could only bow his head, murmuring apologies, the words hollow in his mouth. They were right. All Might had been right. He hadn't saved anyone. He had just been another problem. Bakugo was praised for his powerful quirk and endurance, while Izuku was treated like a fool who had gotten in the way. As he was about to leave, his spirit now not just broken but pulverized, a familiar angry voice cut through the air. Deku, he turned. Bakugo stood there, his uniform singed, his face clean but for the furious scowl permanently etched onto it. I didn't need your help, he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. I was fine. You didn't save me. You didn't do anything. You're just a quirkless loser who got in the way. Don't you ever look down on me like that again. Got it? He shoved past Izuku, his shoulder bumping his hard, and stalked off without a backward glance. That was it. That was the final blow. The hero he tried to save despised him for it. The heroes he admired had reprimanded him for it. And his idol had told him it was impossible. Trudging home in the rain-soaked twilight, Izuku felt a profound emptiness. He was done. The notebooks, the analysis, the years of obsessive training and study, it was all for nothing. It was time to be realistic. It was time to put the dream away for good. He was just passing a quiet, deserted street corner, his head hung low, when a familiar voice, impossibly loud, ripped through the evening air. I am here! Izuku flinched so hard he nearly tripped. He spun around to see All Might, his grin wide, jogging to a halt in front of him. But the usual triumphant energy was absent. He looked urgent. All Might? What are you doing here? I thought you were swarmed by reporters. Izuku stammered, confused. Getting away from them is child's play for me. He boomed, striking a pose. Then, his posture slackened. That's not why I'm here. Young man. I came to thank you? And to apologize. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. Huh! If you hadn't been there, All Might said, his voice dropping to a more serious, personal tone. If you hadn't run in, I would have just been a bystander in a crowd. You told me you had no power, yet you acted. You spurred me to action. You were the most heroic person on that scene today. Izuku's eyes widened. The validation he had craved his entire life, the words he had dreamed of hearing, were being spoken by All Might himself. Tears pricked his eyes again, but these were different. They weren't tears of despair. But I also came to talk to you about my answer on the rooftop, All Might said, and then, to Izuku's utter shock, steam began to pour from the hero's body like a malfunctioning kettle. Crap! He muttered. Poof! In a sudden, comical cloud of smoke, the mountain of muscle vanished. Where the symbol of peace had stood, there was now a skeletal man who looked more like a scarecrow. He was shockingly thin, his blonde hair hanging limp and his eyes sunken into dark sockets. A trickle of blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, which he wiped away with a bony hand. Izuku shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated panic. What? You're deflated. Are you a fake? An imposter? The man sighed, a wheezing, tired sound. I am All Might. He lifted his t-shirt, revealing a horrific, swirling scar that covered the entire left side of his torso. It was a violent vortex of ruined flesh, a permanent testament to some unspeakable injury. I got this in a fight about 5 years back. My stomach was destroyed. I had my entire respiratory system removed. I can only do hero work for about 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, I look like this. Izuku stared, his mind struggling to process the two realities. The smiling, invincible hero, and this frail, broken man. They were the same person. The symbol of peace was living on borrowed time. 5 years ago, was that the fight with Toxic Chainsaw? Izuku asked, his analyst brain kicking in despite his shock. You know your stuff, the man, Toshinori Yagi, though Izuku didn't know that name yet, said with a weak smile. But no. That scrub couldn't have done this. This was a fight that was never made public. I asked that it be kept that way. I didn't want to bring fear to a world that relies on a hero who is always smiling. He looked at Izuku, his blue eyes sharp and intense. On that rooftop, I told you that you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. I stand by that. The kind of hero you want to be, the kind I am, the smiling symbol of peace who can punch his way through any problem. That hero needs overwhelming power. For a long time, I have been searching for a worthy successor to inherit my power. Izuku's heart hammered. Inherit his power? Is his quirk transferable? But watching you today, All Might continued, his gaze piercing, I realized I was looking at the problem from only one angle. I was looking for someone to replace me. Someone to be the next All Might. But the world might not need another All Might. He gestured vaguely at the city around them. This world has become complacent. We are a society propped up by the genetic lottery. We wait for the right quirk to solve the right problem. Our entire system of heroism is reactive, built on the faith that someone, somewhere, will be born with the power to stop the next great threat. But that's a systemic weakness, kid. A dangerous one. What happens when a villain appears that can't be punched? What happens when our strongest pillar, he gestured weakly to himself, finally crumbles for good? Izuku listened, completely rapt. This was a conversation no civilian was ever meant to hear. This was the truth behind the smile. There are a few people who share this fear, All Might said. One of them is the principal of UA High School, an animal with a quirk that grants him hyperintelligence, named Niza. For years, he has argued that our over-reliance on singular, powerful quirks is a societal time bomb. He, along with a select, forward-thinking faction within the Hero Public Safety Commission, conceived a radical solution. A contingency plan. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A secret, joint-funded initiative. It's an experimental program with one goal, to create the first officially sanctioned quirkless hero. A prototype hero who doesn't rely on a gift, but on the absolute peak of human conditioning, cutting-edge technology, and a mind forged into a strategic weapon. He paused, letting the impossible concept hang in the air. They call it Project Chimera. Izuku's mind reeled. A quirkless hero. Sanctioned. Engineered. The name was terrifyingly apartment. A chimera, a creature of myth, made of disparate, unnatural parts. A hero built, not born. The project has existed on paper for years, All Might explained. But they never found a candidate. They needed someone with the right foundation. Not just someone who was quirkless, but someone who possessed an unshakable, almost reckless heroic spirit. Someone with a brilliant analytical mind, but the heart of a true savior. Someone who would be willing to endure a process that would break almost anyone else. He looked Izuku up and down, not at his scrawny frame, but at the fire that had been rekindled in his eyes. The physical training would be hell on earth, designed to push a human body to its absolute breaking point, and then beyond. The technical work would mean being bonded to an experimental suit of armor, becoming a pilot in your own body. The strategic conditioning, under Nizu himself, would be a psychological crucible. It's a path of secrecy, pain, and isolation. There is no guarantee of success. If you fail, you could be crippled. If the technology fails in the field, you could die. You wouldn't be entering the UA hero course like a normal student. You would be their living, breathing experiment. All Might's expression was deadly serious. He wasn't selling a dream anymore. He was presenting a contract, written in blood, sweat, and sacrifice. I cannot give you my power, young man. Your body would explode. But I can give you this chance. A chance to build your own power from the ground up. To forge it from will and steel. We don't need someone to inherit my quirk and become another strongman. The world has plenty of those. Project Chimera needs its first subject. It needs you, Izuku Midoriya. It needs your mind. Your spirit. Your reckless, beautiful, heroic heart. But it needs it to be unbreakable, forged in a fire that would turn others to ash. The world fell silent. The rain had stopped. The only sound was the frantic, impossibly loud drumming of Izuku's own heart. This wasn't the dream he had as a child. That dream was of smiling and saving people with a power like All Might's. It was a simple, clean, beautiful fantasy. This was different. This was a gritty, terrifying, and profoundly real opportunity. It was a path paved not with glory, but with pain. It was the chance to become not a symbol, but a prototype. A new kind of hero. A hero who proved that power was not something you were given, but something you earned. All Might had shattered his dream on that rooftop. But here, on this lonely street corner, he was offering to help him pick up the pieces and forge them into a weapon. Tears streamed down Izuku's face for the third time that day. But this time, they were not tears of sadness or of simple joy. They were tears of catharsis. Of a shattered soul being reforged. The despair, the shame, the 15 years of mockery and self-doubt, all of it was being burned away by a ferocious, untamable hope. He looked up at the skeletal symbol of peace, his small frame trembling not with fear, but with a resolve that felt as solid and real as the pavement beneath his feet. His voice, when it came, was hoarse and choked with emotion, but it did not waver. If there's even a 1 in a million chance, he said, his green eyes blazing with a light that All Might had only ever seen in the reflection of a mirror, I'll take it. A smile spread across Toshinori Yagi's face. It wasn't the broad, camera-ready smile of All Might. It was smaller, genuine, and filled with a profound sense of relief. He had not found a vessel. He had found a partner. A student of a different, more complex kind. I knew you would, he said, placing a bony, yet impossibly strong hand on Izuku's shoulder. Your training begins tomorrow. Welcome to the Crucible, young Midoriya. The location was as secret as it was soulless. Buried deep beneath the polished veneer of the Hero Public Safety Commission's regional headquarters was a facility that didn't officially exist. It had no name, only a designation, Sublevel Gamma. The air was a sterile cocktail of chilled oxygen, antiseptic, and the faint, electric tang of ozone from humming server banks. There were no windows. Time was measured not by the sun, but by the relentless, programmed hum of fluorescent lights. This was Izuku Midoriya's new world. His school, his home, his crucible. His first day began not with a welcoming speech, but with an introduction to the 3 pillars of his transformation. They stood before him in the center of a vast, gray gymnasium padded with high-density foam. The first was a man he recognized with a jolt of nervous energy, Shota Aizawa, the pro-hero Eraserhead. He looked even more exhausted in person, his black jumpsuit hanging loosely on his frame, his capture weapon draped around his neck like a lazy python. His eyes, heavy-lidded and bloodshot, held a terrifying lack of sentiment. He was to be the architect of Izuku's physical self. The second was a small, sharp-featured woman in a crisp HPSC lab coat. Her name was Dr. Kenjaka Eris, head of the Commission's Advanced Support Technology Division. Her black hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her glasses perched on a nose that seemed perpetually wrinkled in disapproval. She held a datapad like a weapon and looked at Izuku not as a boy, but as a complex engineering problem. She was to be the master of his arsenal. The third was a pleasant surprise, a familiar, furry face. Principal Nizuvue sat comfortably on a specially made high chair, a cup of fragrant tea steaming in his paws. His beady black eyes twinkled with an intelligence that felt ancient and vast. He offered Izuku a cheerful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a smile that promised intellectual challenges bordering on psychological warfare. He was to be the sculptor of Izuku's mind. All Might, in his skeletal form, stood beside Izuku, a silent, supportive presence. "These are the people who will guide you, young Midoriya," Toshinori Yagi said, his voice a low rumble. "Listen to them, trust them. And above all, survive them." Aizawa stepped forward, his posture a study in lethargic readiness. "Let's get one thing straight, problem child," he began, his voice a monotone dirge. "This isn't a hero course. This isn't a place for dreams and speeches. This is a laboratory, and you are the experiment. My job is to break your body down and rebuild it into something functional. If you can't handle it, the project is a failure. If you quit, you're just proving everyone who ever doubted you right. The door is over there. Once we start, it's locked until the 10 months are up. Understood?" Izuku, trembling but resolute, straightened his back. "Understood, sir," Aizawa grunted, a flicker of something, perhaps not respect, but at least acknowledgement, in his eyes. "Good. First, we get a baseline." He gestured to a treadmill in the corner. "Run. For how long?" Izuku asked. "Until you collapse." And so it began. The first month was a blur of pure, agonizing hell. Izuku's life dissolved into a brutal cycle of exertion, failure, and fleeting recovery. The baseline Aizawa established was, in a word, pathetic. He could barely run a mile before his lungs burned and his legs gave out. His push-up count was in the single digits. His physical form was a testament to a lifetime of passive observation, not active participation. Aizawa was a relentless, merciless instructor. He never shouted. He never offered empty encouragement. His corrections were quiet, precise, and soul-crushing. "Your form is inefficient. You're wasting energy. You're breathing from your chest, not your diaphragm. Fix it. Pain is a signal. Learn to distinguish between the pain of injury and the pain of progress. Right now, you're just feeling the latter. Keep going." Every morning began at 0500 hours with a run through a specially designed course in the facility, a winding maze of stairs, ramps, and corridors. Izuku would run until he threw up, and then Aizawa would make him run more. After that came strength training. It wasn't about building bulky, useless muscle. It was about functional strength, tendon durability, and explosive power. He did bodyweight exercises until his limbs screamed, pull-ups, squats, lunges. Then he moved to weights, every session calibrated by Dr. Eris's team to push him just shy of catastrophic failure. His diet was a meticulously calculated slurry of proteins, complex carbohydrates, and nutrient pastes that tasted like chalk and despair. There were no cheat days. There were no comfort foods. Everything was fuel. Nothing was for pleasure. More than once, Izuku found himself collapsed on the cold foam mats, his body a symphony of agony, tears of pain and frustration mixing with the sweat on his face. In those moments, the temptation to quit was a physical presence, a seductive whisper in his ear. "You can't do this. You're quirkless. You're weak." All Might was wrong. During one particularly brutal session, after failing to complete a set of weighted pull-ups for the 10th time, he slumped against the wall, gasping. "I can't. I can't do it. Aizawa, who had been observing from a corner, walked over and stood above him. He didn't offer a hand. Can't do what? He asked flatly. Can't lift your own body weight? There are villains who can lift cars. Can't run another lap? There are villains who move faster than sound. You're asking to stand on the same field as them with nothing but your own physical ability. This, he gestured to the gym, is the bare minimum price of admission. If you can't pay it, you don't get in. It's a logical conclusion. Izuku looked down at his trembling, scraped hands. But it hurts. Good, Aizawa said without a hint of sarcasm. It means you're still alive. The moment it stops hurting is the moment you've hit your limit for the day. Now get up. We're moving on to flexibility and reflexive conditioning. It was Toshinori's visits that kept him sane. Once or twice a week, the former hero would appear, often with a bottle of water or a nutrient bar that tasted slightly less terrible. He would sit with Izuku during his brief, mandated rest periods, his skeletal frame a constant, humbling reminder of the cost of heroism. He's hard on you, Toshinori said one afternoon, watching Aizawa put Izuku through a grueling series of acrobatic drills. He's thorough, Izuku managed, his muscles twitching with exhaustion. Shota Aizawa has seen more young heroes with powerful quirks die than anyone else, Toshinori explained quietly. He's seen talent and potential snuffed out by a moment of hesitation, a lapse in judgment. He believes in logical ruses, using trickery and preparation to overcome a power deficit. For you, your entire career will be one continuous logical ruse. He's not training you to be strong, he's training you to be hard to kill. That perspective shift was crucial. This wasn't punishment. This was survival. By the end of the third month, a change was undeniable. The baby fat had melted away, replaced by the sharp, defined lines of lean muscle. His posture, once a permanent cringe, was now straight and confident. Calluses carpeted his hands and feet. The hero analysis notebooks were still by his bedside, but now they were filled with new kinds of notes, analyses of his own performance, ideas for leverage and holds, diagrams of nerve clusters. Aizawa's training evolved. It was no longer just about brute conditioning. It became about movement, parkour, acrobatics, stealth. Izuku spent hours a day in a simulated urban environment, learning to see the city not as a collection of buildings, but as a three-dimensional landscape of opportunity. A ledge was a foothold, a flagpole was a swing point, a fire escape was a ladder. He learned to fall, to roll, to absorb impact. He learned to be silent, to use shadows, to become a ghost in the concrete jungle. His slight frame, once a source of shame, became an asset. He was nimble, agile, and difficult to track. He wasn't becoming a brawler. He was becoming a predator. While his body was being reforged in the gymnasium, his mind was being deconstructed and reassembled in a quiet, minimalist office. His sessions with Niza were, in their own way, more exhausting than Aizawa's physical training. Good afternoon, Midoriya-kun. Niza would chirp, pouring a cup of Earl Grey for his student. Shall we begin? Their lessons were games. But these were games of terrifying complexity. Multi-level chess where pieces had unique abilities. Go boards that spanned three-dimensional holographic fields. But Niza's favorite was a custom-made battle simulation. He would present Izuku with a scenario, a villain attack, a hostage crisis, a natural disaster, often modeled on real-world events. Izuku would be given a set of assets, a team of heroes with specific quirks, available support gear, environmental factors, and a set of objectives. In the beginning, Izuku failed spectacularly. He thought like a fanba, applying brute force solutions. Send the strength hero to fight the strong villain. Send the speed hero to rescue the civilians. Niza would watch, sipping his tea, as Izuku's simulated hero teams were dismantled. An interesting, if predictable, approach, Niza commented after one such failure, where Izuku's team was wiped out by a villain who could reverse the kinetic energy of attacks. You saw a nail, so you grabbed a hammer. You failed to consider that the nail might be a screw. You sacrificed your strongest defensive asset in the first 30 seconds, creating a power vacuum that your other heroes could not fill, leading to a cascading failure of morale and tactical cohesion. Overall AC-4 effort. The principal's cheerful deconstructions were more cutting than any of Aizawa's blunt criticisms. He forced Izuku to abandon his linear, hero-worshipping mindset. He taught him to think not in terms of power, but in terms of systems. A hero is not a person, Midoriya-kun, Nisa lectured, gesturing at the holographic display. A hero is a variable in a complex equation. The villain is another. The environment, the civilians, the media, all are variables. Your task is not to defeat the villain. It is to manipulate the variables in such a way that the equation resolves in your favor. Sometimes that means defeating the villain. Sometimes it means discrediting them. Sometimes it means letting them win a minor battle to trap them in a larger strategic loss. You are not a warrior, you are a systems analyst with a very aggressive fieldwork component. They studied historical battles, corporate takeovers, political campaigns. Nisa taught him game theory, psychology, resource management, and predictive modeling. Izuku's hero analysis notebooks transformed again. They were no longer just collections of facts about quirks. They became intricate webs of cause and effect, psychological profiles, and strategic flowcharts. He didn't just write down what a hero's quirk was. He analyzed its economic impact, its psychological toll on the user, its potential unforeseen applications, and a dozen ways to counter it with, and without a quirk of his own. His mind, already sharp, was being honed into a razor's edge. He began to see the world differently. He saw the structural weaknesses in buildings, the optimal sight lines from rooftops, the patterns in crowd behavior. He was learning to read the source code of society itself. The breakthrough came around the 6th month. Nisa presented him with a classic scenario, the USJ incident from the previous year. Izuku was given the exact hero complement present, 13 in Aizawa, plus a class of students. Instead of sending Aizawa to fight the mob, Izuku's first move was to have 13 use Black Hole to create a defensive perimeter and collapse the entrance, trapping the villains and preventing escape. He then deployed Aizawa not as a frontline combatant, but as a phantom, using his erasure to surgically disable key threats while the students, organized into tactical squads based on their quirk synergy, engaged the leaderless fodder. He identified Shigaraki as the command node and tagged him for constant, non-lethal harassment by the most mobile students, preventing him from coordinating the attack. The Noma was identified as a brute force problem to be isolated and stalled, not defeated, until reinforcements arrived. His plan was elegant, efficient, and resulted in 0 student casualties and a 95% capture rate. Nisa stared at the simulation results, his whiskers twitching. He set down his teacup. "Well now," he said, a genuine, delighted smile spreading across his face. "That's a new high score. It seems the caterpillar is beginning to build its chrysalis." "Excellent work, Midoriya-kun." For Izuku, that quiet praise was more rewarding than lifting 1,000 pounds. The final piece of the puzzle was the technology. Dr. Eris and her team of HPSC engineers were masters of efficiency, precision, and pragmatism. Their lab was a place of chrome, glass, and hushed concentration. In the first few months, they measured every conceivable aspect of Izuku's physiology, creating a biometric database of terrifying detail. Your skeletal structure can withstand 4.8 gs of force before risking fracture, Dr. Eris would state, reading from her datapad. Your caloric consumption under extreme duress is 7,000 calories per day. We need to design a system that both augments your capabilities and compensates for your deficiencies without exceeding these parameters. Their initial designs were logical, boring, and safe. But Nisa had a surprise for them. "Dr. Eris, your team is brilliant," he said during a project meeting. "But you lack a certain creative chaos. Project Chimera requires not just engineering, but artistry. As such, UA will be lending you one of our most promising first-year support students to consult on the project." The doors to the lab slid open, and a girl with pink dreadlocks, goggles perched on her head, and a manic grin on her face practically vibrated into the room. She was covered in grease stains and smelled faintly of burnt wiring. "May Hatsum, at your service," she bellowed, her yellow, zoom lens eyes taking in every piece of tech in the room. "Whoa! Is that a cryo-compressed carbon fiber loom? And you're using a liquid-cooled mainframe for your simulations? Old school. I love it. So, Who's the lucky crash test dummy I get to build my babies for? Dr. Eris looked as though she had just swallowed a lemon. May Hatsum was a hurricane. She had no concept of personal space, safety protocols, or indoor voices. But she was, without a doubt, a genius. While the HPSC team focused on what was possible, May focused on what was impossible, and then tried to build it anyway. The creation of the Aegis MK. I became a collaboration between three opposing forces: Dr. Eris's cautious pragmatism, May's explosive innovation, and Izuku's analytical insight. We need a basic armored suit, Eris declared, pulling up a schematic of a generic-looking bodysuit. Boring! May shouted, hijacking the monitor. It needs an integrated exoskeleton for load-bearing and impact distribution. We can use my electromagnetic muscle fiber servos to augment his strength without adding too much weight. I call them power leggies. My analysis of close-quarters combat against strength-enhancing quirks shows that brute force is a losing battle, Izuku interjected, pulling up one of his notebooks. Augmented strength is good for mobility and grappling, but not for trading punches. The primary function of the suit should be defense and utility. We need to prioritize impact absorption and a grappling system, and so the design evolved. The final Aegis MK. I was a thing of utilitarian beauty. It was a dark, forest green bodysuit made of a sheer thickening polymer that hardened on impact, with matte black plates of a lightweight ceramic composite protecting vital areas. A subtle, low-profile exoskeleton webbed across the back, arms, and legs. The gauntlets were Izuku's idea, born from his USJ analysis. They housed the suit's primary tools. The right gauntlet contained a high-tensile grappling line launcher with 3 different anchor types: piercing, magnetic, and adhesive. The left gauntlet housed the projectile system for non-lethal capture foam, a rapidly expanding and hardening substance that could immobilize a target. The boots contained small, short-burst thrusters, May's babies, designed not for flight, but for rapid directional changes, enhanced jumps, and braking falls. But the crown jewel was the visor. It flipped down from the col of the suit, its multi-layered lens glowing with a soft cyan light. It provided thermal and sonic vision, but its main purpose was data analysis. Linked to the HPSC criminal and quirk database, it could identify known villains, display their quirk information, and using a predictive algorithm developed by Nizu, analyze movement patterns to highlight probable attack vectors and weak points in real time. Testing the gear was an exercise in controlled chaos. May's first grappling hook prototype was so powerful it ripped a chunk of concrete out of the wall and nearly dislocated Izuku's shoulder. Her first attempt at capture foam filled the entire testing chamber in a sticky, immovable mess. But through trial and error, through Izuku's feedback and Eris's refinements, the systems were perfected. The first time Izuku donned the complete Aegis MK. It felt less like a suit and more like a second skin. It was heavy, but the exoskeleton bore the weight. He felt capable. It's not power, All Might said, observing the final fitting. He was smiling. It's potential. A tool waiting for a skilled hand. The 10th month was dedicated to synthesis. It was time to put the body, the mind, and the armor together. Aizawa ran him through combat simulations, no longer against drones, but against holographic projections of actual villains, their AI programmed by Nizu based on extensive data. Izuku learned to move in the suit, to make the grapple line an extension of his body, swinging through the simulated cityscapes. He learned to trust the visor, to process the flood of information it provided and make split-second tactical decisions. He learned not to fight, but to control the battlefield. His final test took place 1 week before the UA entrance exams. He stood in the center of the vast simulation chamber, the environment configured to look like the USJ. Objective: survive and protect civilian assets for 10 minutes against an unknown hostile. Nizu's voice chirped over the intercom. The simulation began. From the shadows emerged a holographic figure Izuku recognized with a spike of cold fear, the hero killer, Stain. Izuku's heart hammered, but his training took over. Visor on. Analyze. Target is fast, agile, bladed weapons. Quirk, blood curdle. Ingestion of blood paralyzes target. Do not get cut. Stain lunged, a blur of motion. The Izuku from 10 months ago would have been frozen in terror. The new Izuku reacted. He fired a thruster burst from his boots, launching himself backwards and sideways, putting distance between them. As he moved, he fired a grapple line into the ceiling, swinging up and away. Stain was relentless, bounding off walls, his blades singing through the air. Izuku didn't try to engage him head-on. He became a ghost. He used the environment, swinging through the rafters, using smoke pellets from his utility belt to break line of sight. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to run out the clock, a perfectly logical strategy against a foe he couldn't beat in a direct confrontation. He made a mistake. A miscalculation in a swing brought him too close to a wall. Stain was there in an instant, his katana flashing. Izuku twisted, but the blade still scraped his arm, tearing the fabric of the suit and drawing blood. Alert, dermal integrity compromised. Minor blood loss detected, a calm, feminine voice from the suit's AI reported. Stain's grotesque tongue flicked out. It's over, he lunged for the cut. But Izuku was prepared. He had analyzed Stain's movements for months in Nisa's simulations. He knew the lunge was coming. As Stain came in, Izuku fired his left gauntlet, not at Stain, but at his own arm. A huge glob of white capture foam instantly erupted from the nozzle, covering the wound in a thick, rapidly hardening shell. Stain's tongue licked uselessly against the hard foam. His eyes widened in shock. That momentary hesitation was all Izuku needed. He slammed his armored boot into the ground, activating the thruster. The force wasn't for an attack, it was a pivot. He spun on his heel, using the momentum to swing his other leg in a powerful, augmented arc that slammed into Stain's side, sending the hologram stumbling back. Before Stain could recover, the 10-minute timer buzzed. The simulation ended. The hologram dissolved. Izuku stood panting in the silent room, his arm encased in his own capture foam. He hadn't won. He had survived. He had used his mind, his body, and his tools in perfect harmony. The observation room was silent for a long moment. Aizawa, Eris, and Tashinori stared at the screen. Nisa began to clap, a slow, deliberate sound. "Bravo," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "A truly magnificent logical ruse. Project Chimera is a success. The prototype is ready." A few days later, Izuku stood in his small, sparse room in the Gamma facility. He was dressed not in a training suit, but in his old middle school uniform. On his bed was a single, elegant envelope with the UA seal. It wasn't a letter of acceptance from a machine. It was a formal document, stamped and signed by the HPSC and Principal Nisa, a special recommendation for the hero course. Candidate, Izuku Midoriya. Quirk null. He held the paper, the culmination of 10 months of unimaginable hardship. He wasn't the same boy who had stood on that rooftop. That boy was gone, burned away in the crucible. In his place stood someone new, someone lean, hard, and focused. Someone whose dream was no longer a childish fantasy, but a calculated, achievable objective. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of his monitor. He saw the quiet confidence in his own eyes, the set of his jaw. He had earned this. Every drop of sweat, every torn muscle, every moment of despair had been a payment. And now, he held the receipt. His journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. UA High would be his first field test. Class 1A would be his new reality. He was stepping into a world of prodigies and chosen ones, a ghost with no power to his name. But he was not unarmed. He had his body, forged in pain. He had his mind, sharpened by a master. And he had his armor, the Aegis, waiting for its first true battle. He was Izuku Midoriya. And he was ready to show them all what a quirkless hero could do. The walk to UA High was a pilgrimage Izuku had made in his dreams 1,000 times. In those dreams, he was always running late, tripping over his own feet, a nobody about to witness the hallowed halls of the gods. The reality was profoundly different. He was not late. He was early. His stride was not clumsy. It was measured, efficient, a habit drilled into him by 10 months in the crucible. The world looked different now. His eyes, once drawn to the vibrant flashes of quirks on display, now instinctively catalogued the urban landscape through a new, analytical filter. He didn't just see a bridge, He saw load-bearing pylons, potential grapple points, and the blind spots beneath its arches. He didn't see a crowd. He saw flow patterns, potential choke points, and vectors for panic. It was the Niza vision, as he'd privately termed it, a constant, low-level strategic analysis of everything around him. It was exhausting, but it was also his greatest weapon. His new body felt different, too. The U uniform, which should have been a symbol of ultimate triumph, felt foreign. It was loose, designed for normal teenage bodies, not one that had been systematically broken down and rebuilt into a dense, compact engine of sinew and wire-like muscle. Underneath the gray blazer, he could feel the faint, crisscrossing lines of old scars and the permanent ache of deep muscle fatigue. He was a weapon disguised as a schoolboy. He arrived at the gate, a massive archway that screamed prestige, and presented his special ID. The guard, a stern-looking man with rock-like skin, scanned it. A light blinked green, and a small notation flashed on his monitor. One Izuku knew was there. Project Chimera. Clearance level Alpha. The guard's expression didn't change, but his eyes lingered on Izuku for a fraction of a second longer than they did on the other students. Izuku was already an anomaly. He found Class 1A without trouble, his path pre-memorized from the schematics Niza had provided. The door was absurdly large, a towering slab of wood and metal designed, he presumed, to accommodate students with gigantification or mutation quirks. For a moment, the old Izuku surfaced, a flicker of overwhelming awe and intimidation. He took a deep breath, the disciplined inhale-exhale Aizawa had taught him, and pushed the colossal door open. The classroom was already buzzing with the chaotic energy of teenagers on the first day of their new lives. A blue-haired boy with a severe expression was chastising a familiar, spiky-haired blonde for having his feet on the desk. It is a gross violation of school etiquette and an insult to the upperclassmen and craftsmen who created these desks. The boy chopped the air with his hands for emphasis. Like I give a damn what you think, you four-eyed extra, Katsuki Bakugo snarled, not even bothering to look at him. Izuku felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Kaken. He was here. Of course he was here. He had dominated the practical exam, destroying robots with a ferocity that had made the news. He tried to slip in unnoticed, to find his assigned seat, 18, in the back row, but it was impossible. The moment he stepped over the threshold, Bakugo's head snapped up. His crimson eyes, usually burning with arrogance, widened for a split second in pure, unadulterated shock. It was the same look he'd had on the rooftop, the look that said you don't belong here. But this time, it was curdled with a new, dark suspicion. Deku? Bakugo's voice was a low growl, silencing the immediate vicinity. The blue-haired boy turned. Ah, you are the student I saw at the orientation. I am Tenya Ida, from semi-private academy. Before Izuku could respond, a cheerful voice cut in. Oh, it's you! The plain-looking one. A girl with a round face and a brown bob, Achiko Uraraka, bounced over. I'm so glad you got in. That punch in the practical exam was incredible. It was like BWHOM. Izuku froze. Punch? They must have been talking about someone else. He hadn't taken the practical exam. His entry was a secret. He was a ghost. I think you have me confused with, he started to say, but the classroom door slid open with a weary groan. A man who looked like he'd been sleeping in a ditch for a week shuffled into the room inside a yellow sleeping bag. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, Shota Aizawa's voice droned from the floor. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. He unzipped himself and rose, looking like a disgruntled caterpillar emerging from its cocoon. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pleasure to meet you. The class stared in stunned silence. This disheveled, exhausted man was a UA teacher? Right, let's get to it, Aizawa continued, his gaze sweeping over them. Put these on and meet me on the athletic field. He held up a UA gym uniform. There was no room for argument in his tone. As the students filed out to the changing rooms, Izuku felt Bakugo's burning stare on his back. The question was a palpable force in the air. How? On the sun-drenched athletic field, Class 1A stood assembled, a vibrant collection of Japan's most promising young heroes. Their excited chatter died as Aizawa began to speak. Today, we'll be conducting a quirk apprehension test, he announced, his voice flat. A quirk test? The class exclaimed in unison. But what about the entrance ceremony? And orientation? Uraraka asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Here at UA, we're not bound by pointless traditions, Aizawa stated, his gaze unnervingly steady. The hero course is about preparing you for the realities of the job. You don't have time for ceremonies. His eyes found Bakugo in the crowd. You, Bakugo. You finished first in the practical exam. What was your best score for the softball throw in middle school? 67 meters, Bakugo said, a smirk playing on his lips. Try it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed him a ball. Bakugo strode to the throwing circle, a predator taking center stage. He stretched his arm, a wicked grin spreading across his face. Die! He screamed, launching the ball with a massive, controlled explosion. The projectile became a miniature comet, soaring high into the blue sky. Aizawa held up a small device. A digital display read, 705.2 meters. The class erupted in cheers and exclamations of awesome. And that's a hero's score. So this is what UA is all about. A redhead with spiky teeth, Eijiro Kurishima, grinned. This looks like fun. A girl with pink skin and hair, Mina Ashido, chirped. Aizawa's expression soured. Fun? You think this is fun? The temperature on the field seemed to drop by 10 degrees. You have 3 years here to become heroes. You think it's all going to be games and fun times? His eyes narrowed, and a grim shadow fell over his face. So be it. The student who ranks last in total points across all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be summarily expelled. Panic ripped through the class. Expelled? But it's the first day. That's not fair. Uraraka protested. And natural disasters are fair? Power-hungry villains are fair? A world that requires us to risk our lives is fair? Aizawa retorted, his voice cutting like glass. It's not. That's a hero's job, to fight against the unfairness of the world. For the next 3 years, you will throw one hardship after another at you. This is plus ultra. Overcome these challenges, or you don't belong here. His gaze, cold and final, landed directly on Izuku. Midoriya. The class turned as one to look at him. You are a special case, Aizawa said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Izuku Midoriya was admitted on a special recommendation from Principal Nizu and the Hero Public Safety Commission. He is part of an experimental provisional hero program. Aizawa paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. His quirk is officially registered as null. He is, for all intents and purposes, quirkless. If his expulsion threat had caused panic, this statement created a shockwave of pure, unadulterated disbelief. The field went dead silent, save for the chirping of distant birds. Quirkless? In the UA hero course? It was impossible. It was a joke. Whispers erupted like wildfire. Did he say quirkless? No way. That has to be a mistake. Is that even allowed? Izuku stood unflinching, his face a mask of calm. He had prepared for this moment with Nizu for weeks. He was the ghost, the anomaly. Now, he was being put on display. Uraraka's face was a picture of open-mouthed pity. Poor kid, her expression seemed to say. He's going to be expelled for sure. Ida's hand shot up halfway, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting information. A quirkless student in the hero course defied all logic and precedent, yet it had been sanctioned by the principal himself. His internal rulebook was having a meltdown. Todoroki, who had been standing impassively at the edge of the group, turned his heterochromatic gaze on Izuku. His expression was unreadable, but a flicker of genuine curiosity disturbed the icy calm. The absence of power, in a world defined by it, was an intellectual curiosity he couldn't ignore. But it was Bakugo's reaction that was the most volatile. It wasn't loud. It was a terrifying, quiet implosion. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. The veins on his neck stood out. Lying. The word screamed in his mind. He's been lying this whole time. All those years of useless muttering and crying, it was all a trick. He found some backdoor way to cheat his way in. He's making a mockery of me. Of All Might. of this entire school. This was not the weak, pathetic Deku he knew. This was an imposter. Aizawa ignored the turmoil. The test applies to you as well, Midoriya. Last place is last place. Now let's begin. The first test, the 50-meter dash. Ida went first, his leg engines flaring. 3.04 seconds. Tsuyu Ajiri, the frog girl, used her powerful legs. 5.58 seconds. One by one, the students showcased their abilities. Then it was Izuku's turn. He walked to the starting line, his movements deliberate. The class watched, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity on their faces. He's just going to run? Someone whispered. Izuku crouched into a perfect sprinter stance, a form drilled into him by Aizawa. The starting pistol fired. For the first 10 meters, he was a blur of pure, conditioned human speed. Then, a soft but distinct PSSSHT sound came from his ankles. Tiny, controlled bursts of compressed air fired from thrusters concealed in the heels of his regulation gym shoes. A small gift from Meihatsum, approved by Nisa for baseline data collection. The thrusters didn't lift him. They propelled him, each burst timed perfectly with his stride. He crossed the finish line. The robotic voice announced his time, 5.49 seconds. It wasn't a record-breaking time. It was just shy of Tsuyu's. But it was faster than several others, including the heavily built Sato and the multi-armed Shoji. It was, and possibly, a respectable hero course time. The whispers changed from pity to confusion. What was that sound? Did you see that? He had something on his shoes. Next, the grip strength test. Shoji, with his multiple muscular arms, recorded an incredible 540 kilograms. Izuku stepped up to the machine. He gripped the handle, and for a moment, the reading was a pathetic 46 kilograms. A few students snickered. Bakugo smirked. Then, Izuku adjusted his grip. Underneath his gym uniform, hidden along the forearm, was a thin, flexible sleeve of electromagnetic muscle fiber servos, a prototype component of the Aegis suit. He activated it with a subtle flex of his triceps. A low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrated through his arm. He squeezed again. The numbers on the machine shot up, climbing rapidly before stopping at 180 kilograms. The snickering died. It wasn't Shoji level, but it was 3 times what a peak condition athlete could manage. It was superhuman. That's not a quirk, a boy with a lightning bolt in his hair, Denki Kaminari said aloud. That's tech. The standing long jump, he cleared the sandbox with another timely boot thruster assist. The repeated side steps, his Aizawa-trained agility, and low center of gravity made him a silent blur. He wasn't topping the charts, but he was consistently placing in the middle of the pack. He was proving, test by test, that he was not helpless. He was competent. The final test was the ball throw. The one that separated the monsters from the rest. Uraraka, with her zero-gravity quirk, had just scored an infinity symbol, stunning the class. Now, all eyes were on Izuku as he stepped into the circle. This was the test that required raw, explosive power. He had none. He stood there for a moment, the regulation softball feeling heavy in his hand. The silence was deafening. This was it. This was the test he couldn't gain with simple mobility or strength aids. Bakugo's smirk was back, wider and more vicious than ever. This is where the little cheat finally gets what he deserves, he muttered to Kirishima. Watch him cry when he gets a double-digit score. Izuku took a deep breath. He didn't look at the ball. He looked at Aizawa. Then, with a calm, practiced motion, he reached into a small pouch on the hip of his gym pants, another data collection add-on. He pulled out a small, metallic disc, no bigger than a coin, with a slightly adhesive back. The class leaned in, confused. What was that? He carefully pressed the disc onto the surface of the softball. Aizawa-sensei, Izuku called out, his voice clear and steady. The rules state we are allowed to use our quirks. Principal Nizu and the HPSC have defined my quirk for the purpose of this program as the strategic and practical application of specialized technology to solve problems. He held up the ball, showing the disc. This is a Mach 4 kinetic propellant charge. It's a stable, non-lethal, Single-use device designed to apply precisely 700 kilonewtons of directional force to a small mass upon remote activation. It is a tool. May I proceed? The explanation was so clinical, so technical, it stunned the class into silence. It wasn't the plea of a weakling asking for a handicap. It was the statement of an engineer describing his equipment. Aizawa stared at him. For a long, tense moment, the teacher's face was unreadable. Then, the corner of his mouth twitched. It was almost a smile. A slow, grim, approving smile. A logical ruse. The kid was a walking, talking logical ruse. It's within the parameters of your established exemption, Aizawa said, his voice a low drawl. Proceed. Bakugo's face went from smug to thunderous. Exemption? Parameters? He's cheating, Izuku nodded. He turned, took a throwing stance, and hurled the ball high into the air in a perfect, soaring arc. It was a good throw for a normal person, but nothing special. For a few seconds, it seemed like it would land with a disappointing thud around the 80-meter mark. Then, just as it reached the apex of its arc, Izuku subtly pressed a button on the wrist of his support sleeve. Thump WHSSSHHH. A tiny, almost silent explosion of force erupted from the disc. There was no fire, no smoke, just a directional blast of pure kinetic energy. The ball, which had been starting its descent, suddenly changed direction and shot forward as if struck by an invisible bat. It flew and flew and flew, a white speck against the endless blue. It finally landed far, far in the distance. Aizawa held up his phone. The class held its breath. 705.3 meters, 0.1 meter farther than Bakugo. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a silence born of shattered expectations. Izuku hadn't just passed the test. He hadn't just survived. He had taken the one test that was symbolic of raw power, the test that Bakugo had used to declare his dominance, and he had beaten him. Not with muscle. Not with a gift from God. But with a plan. With a small piece of metal and a perfectly timed button press. It was the most profound insult Bakugo had ever received in his life. It was a declaration that his innate, God-given power could be matched, and even surpassed, by the cold, calculated application of a nerd's ingenuity. Aizawa showed the final scoreboard. Izuku was ranked 11th out of 21. Solidly, safely in the middle. Minoru Mineta, the small boy with purple balls on his head, was in last place. By the way, the expulsion thing was a lie, Aizawa said with a deadpan expression. It was a logical ruse to get you to perform at your best. The class erupted, a mixture of outrage and relief. But Izuku wasn't listening. He was breathing, focusing on the calm-down exercises Aizawa had taught him. He had done it. Step 1 was complete. As Aizawa dismissed them to change, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Ida and Uraraka. Midoriya-kun! Ida began, his arm chopping stiffly. Your performance was unorthodox, but undeniably effective. I must admit, I was confused by Aizawa-sensei's introduction, but your results speak for themselves. Your grasp of applied sciences is most impressive. Yeah, that was so cool. Uraraka beamed, her earlier pity replaced with genuine awe. That little rocket thing was awesome. And your speed! What other gadgets do you have? Is that all part of your special program? Izuku, for the first time in his life, found himself the center of positive attention from his peers. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. It's a work in progress. It's mostly mobility and analysis gear. Gadgets? Work in progress? A new voice, low and dripping with venom, cut them off. Bakugo stood before them, his hands shoved in his pockets, his body radiating a palpable aura of rage. But his face was eerily calm, his red eyes narrowed to slits. Don't listen to his lies, Bakugo snarled, his gaze locked on Izuku. He ignored Ida and Uraraka completely. He doesn't have any gear. He's a cheat. Bakugo-kun, that is an unsubstantiated accusation. Ida protested. Midoriya-kun was given an official exemption. Bakugo took a step forward, invading Izuku's personal space. You've been looking down on me all this time, haven't you? He whispered, his voice a gravelly threat. Letting me think you were just some useless, worthless pebble on the side of the road. While you were planning this? Finding some trick, some backdoor way to sneak in where you don't belong. He reached out and grabbed the front of Izuku's gym uniform, yanking him forward. You don't have a power. You never have. You're just using toys. That's not what a hero is. A hero is born with greatness. They don't build it in a lab like some cheap fake. His eyes were wild with a new kind of fury, an ideological fury. You're a fraud, Deku. And I'm going to prove it to everyone. The old Izuku would have flinched, cried, stammered apologies. But 10 months in the crucible had burned that boy away. Izuku did not look down. He did not tremble. He met Bakugo's furious gaze with a calm, unwavering stare that was utterly alien to the explosive teen. You're wrong, Kaken, Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm, carrying an authority that stunned Bakugo into a momentary silence. A hero is someone who saves people. It doesn't matter if they use a quirk they were born with or a tool they built with their own hands. He looked at Bakugo's grip on his shirt, and then back to his eyes. The result is the only thing that matters. And I will get results. The sheer, unexpected defiance in Izuku's voice, the cold certainty of his words, hit Bakugo harder than any physical punch could have. This wasn't Deku. This was someone else wearing his face. That's enough, Aizawa's tired voice cut through the tension. He stood a few feet away, his eyes glowing a faint red, his hair beginning to levitate. Bakugo's quirk fizzled, the tiny crackles of sweat nitroglycerin on his palms dying instantly. He released Izuku's shirt with a frustrated growl, shoving him back. This isn't over, he spat, before turning and stalking away, his shoulders stiff with rage. As the other students cleared out, leaving Izuku alone on the field, Aizawa walked over. Don't think this changes anything, problem child, he said. You passed one test. You proved you have a right to stand at the starting line. The race is just beginning. Every single day will be a test for you. Don't get complacent. I won't, sir, Izuku said, bowing his head respectfully. He was no longer a ghost. A ghost is unseen, unheard. Today, he had made his presence known. He had put a name to the anomaly. In a class of gods and monsters, a human had just proven he could keep up. He had made friends, and he had drawn a new, deeper line in the sand with his oldest rival. The quiet, analytical boy was gone. In his place stood the prototype, and his first day was finally over. The next day, the atmosphere in Class 1A was a thick soup of tension and curiosity. Izuku Midoriya was no longer just a name on a roster. He was a concept, a walking, breathing paradox that had upended the classroom's unspoken hierarchy. Those who had pitied him now looked at him with a mix of awe and confusion. Those who had been indifferent were now intrigued, and the one who had always scorned him now watched him with a hatred so potent it felt like a physical force. The morning classes, English with Present Mike, Modern Hero Art History with Midnight, were a blur to Izuku. His mind wasn't on grammar or the evolution of hero costumes. It was processing data. He was running silent, continuous analyses of his classmates, refining the preliminary files Nisa had provided. He noted Kirishima's subconscious habit of hardening his forearms when startled, a potential tell. He observed Tokoemi's tendency to stay near shadows, even in the brightly lit classroom, confirming the light dependency of dark shadow. He saw Uraraka's easygoing nature, but also the fierce determination in her eyes when the topic turned to finances, hinting at a powerful, personal motivation. And he watched Bakugo. Kaken didn't look at him, not once. He stared straight ahead, a statue of simmering rage. But Izuku could see the telltale signs of his agitation, the way his fingers drummed a frantic, explosive rhythm on his desk, the clenching of his jaw, the almost imperceptible tremor in his shoulders. He wasn't just angry. He was unsettled. The rigid, predictable world he had built, with himself at the apex, had been fractured by an impossible variable. By Deku. The real test, however, came after lunch. I am. A booming voice echoed through the hallway. Coming through the door like a normal person, All Might, in his magnificent Silver Age costume, burst into the classroom, his grin a beacon of raw power. The class erupted in a cacophony of fanboy and fangirl squeals. For a moment, even Izuku felt the old, reflexive awe bubble up inside him. This was the man who had set him on his impossible path. "Welcome to the class you've all been waiting for. Basic Hero Training," All Might announced, striking a dramatic pose. "And for your first lesson, we're heading straight for the crucible of combat. Battle training." As he spoke, panels slid from the wall, revealing numbered cases. "And to do that, you'll need these. Your very own hero costumes, designed based on your quirk registration forms and the requests you submitted." A wave of pure ecstasy washed over the class. Izuku felt a different kind of thrill. His costume wasn't in one of those cases. It had been waiting for him, a silent promise locked away in sub-level Gamma. As the class rushed to get their gear, All Might caught Izuku's eye. The hero's booming smile was for the class, but the subtle, almost imperceptible nod was for Izuku alone. "Show them." They gathered in the tunnel leading to Ground Beta, a sprawling, hyper-realistic cityscape built for combat simulations. One by one, his classmates emerged, a vibrant tableau of burgeoning heroic identities. Ida's full-body armor looked like a knight from the future. Uraraka's sleek, pink and black suit was both cute and practical. Todoroki's was simple, half white, half blue, a stark representation of his divided self. And then there was Bakugo. His costume was aggression personified. A black, sleeveless top, baggy pants, and massive, grenade-shaped gauntlets on his arms. It was designed for one purpose: maximum explosive output. Finally, Izuku stepped out. His appearance drew a fresh wave of stares and whispers. He was not flashy. He was not colorful. He was a shadow-given form, the Aegis MK. I was a masterpiece of tactical subtlety. The main body was a dark, forest green suit, the color of deep moss, designed to blend into both natural and urban shadows. It was crisscrossed with lines of a slightly darker, matte black material, marking the flexible sheer thickening polymer beneath. Over this, plates of a non-reflective ceramic composite protected his torso, shoulders, and thighs. They were angular and sharp, designed to deflect rather than absorb blows. A heavy-duty utility belt, bristling with small, cylindrical pouches, sat low on his hips. His gauntlets were the most prominent feature, reaching from his knuckles to his elbows. They were the same matte black as the armor plates, functional and severe. The right housed the gleaming, multi-port grappling line launcher, while the left featured the wider nozzle of the capture foam dispenser. His boots were reinforced, with visible vents for the thrusters at the heel and sole. The final piece was the cowl. It was integrated into the suit, framing his face but leaving his mouth exposed. Attached to it, currently flipped up on his forehead, was the sleek, wraparound visor. When he was ready, it would snap down, obscuring his eyes behind a pane of glowing cyan data. He looked less like a traditional hero and more like a special ops soldier from a dystopian future. The name Niza had chosen for him, his official hero codename for the project, felt chillingly appropriate. Prototype Hero, Chimera. "Whoa, Midoriya, your costume is so cool. Very tactical," Uraraka said, her eyes wide. "It's utilitarian," Izuku replied, flexing his armored fingers. The servos in the suit hummed softly, matching his movements perfectly. "Looks like a cheap knockoff of a real hero's gear," Bakugo sneered, his gaze dripping with contempt. "All those toys won't help you when you're up against real power." All Might cleared his throat, drawing their attention. "They say the clothes make the hero, and you all look the part. You're ready to take your first steps as champions of justice." He explained the exercise, a 2-on-2 indoor battle. One team would be the heroes, tasked with capturing a prop nuclear weapon or apprehending the villains. The villain team would win by protecting the weapon for the time limit, or capturing the heroes. And your partners and opponents will be decided by drawing lots. All Might declared, pulling out 2 boxes. The teams were drawn one by one. Shoji and Todoroki. Ojiro and Hagakure. And then, All Might pulled the next slips. Team A will be Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka. Izuku felt a small sense of relief. Uraraka was friendly, and her quirk was versatile. He could work with her, and their opponents. Team D will be Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, pierced through Izuku's calm. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of dramatic irony. He looked across the crowd and met Bakugo's eyes. The blonde teen's face stretched into a slow, predatory grin that was utterly terrifying. It was a grin that promised pain. It was a grin that said, I finally have permission to break you. The hero team will be Team A, and the villains will be Team D. All Might announced. Villains, you have 5 minutes to enter the building and prepare. Heroes, you will wait outside and formulate your plan. Everyone else, to the monitor room. Inside the designated building, a drab, 5-story office complex, Bakugo and Ida made their way to the weapons location on the top floor. So, Bakugo-kun, our opponents are Midoriya-kun and Uraraka-san, Ida began, already in strategy mode. Midoriya's abilities are based on technology and analysis. Uraraka's is zero gravity. Logically, their primary mode of attack will be stealth and subterfuge. We should focus on securing all potential entry points to this room. I can use my speed to patrol the corridors while you— Shut up, Four Eyes, Bakugo growled, his attention fixed on the prop bomb. I have a plan. You stand here and guard this junk. What? But that's tactically unsound. We should work together too. Bakugo spun on him, his eyes blazing with barely contained fury. My plan is simple. That shitty nerd thinks he's so smart, with his tricks and his toys. He thinks he can outthink me, but he has one massive, glaring weakness, me. He slammed a fist into his palm, a small explosion crackling on impact. Deku is terrified of me. He always has been. He'll be so busy trying to avoid me that he'll make a mistake. I'm not going to wait for him to sneak around. I'm going to find him, and I'm going to beat him into the ground until he quits this stupid charade. You just stay out of my way. Ida was appalled. This is a training exercise, not a personal vendetta. Your approach is reckless and unbecoming of a hero. I'm going to be the #1 hero, Bakugo snarled, turning and stalking towards the door. And #1 doesn't lose to some quirkless, cheating wannabe. I'm ending this. Now. He stormed out of the room, leaving a shocked and conflicted Ida to guard the bomb alone. Outside, Izuku and Uraraka stood before the building's entrance, a blueprint schematic displayed on a tablet provided by All Might. Okay, so Kaken and Ida are the villains, Izuku murmured, his mind already racing, processing variables. Kaken. Bakugo is aggressive, prideful, and incredibly powerful at close to mid-range. He'll come straight for me. He won't play defense. Ida is fast, methodical, and rule-abiding. He'll be the one guarding the objective. He traced a finger over the blueprint. They're on the 5th floor. Ida will likely fortify the room. Bakugo will use the narrow corridors to his advantage, trying to corner me and force a direct fight. So, what do we do? Uraraka asked, her face a mask of nervous determination. Should we try to fight them together? Izuku shook his head. He pulled his visor down over his eyes. The world resolved into a cool, cyan-tinted display. Data scrolled across the periphery of his vision, building schematics, thermal readings, his own heart rate. No, he said, his voice slightly filtered by the suit's comms. We can't win a direct fight. Bakugo is a natural-born combat genius. His instincts are as dangerous as his quirk. Fighting him on his terms is a losing strategy. And Ida's speed means we can't just rush the objective. He looked at Uraraka. This isn't a fight. It's a problem to be solved. And the solution is to divide their forces and exploit their weaknesses. He pointed to a spot on the blueprint. Their biggest weakness is their lack of teamwork. Bakugo's pride won't let him cooperate. He sees this as a one-on-one fight against me. We're going to use that. He outlined the plan. It was risky. It was complex. It relied on perfect timing and absolute trust. You're the hero who captures the weapon, Uraraka-san, he finished, his voice steady and confident. My job is to be the bait. I will draw Bakugo away and keep him occupied. That's the only way this works. Uraraka stared at him. He was willingly proposing to face the explosive powerhouse of their class alone, just to give her an opening. The boy who was supposedly quirkless was planning to be a shield for her. A new level of respect solidified in her heart. Okay, she said, her voice firm. I trust you, Midoriya-kun. Let's do this. Call me Deku, he said, a small, determined smile on his face. It's the name of a hero now. Alright, Deku-kun. Heroes, begin. All Might's voice boomed over the speakers. Izuku and Uraraka slipped into the building through a ground floor window. The interior was dark and silent. Izuku's visor immediately switched to a combined thermal and sonar mode, painting the world in shifting blues and reds and outlining the building's structure in faint green lines. 2 heat signatures, he whispered into his comm, which was patched directly to Uraraka's earpiece. One is stationary on the 5th floor, north side. That's Ida. The other is moving, 4th floor, coming down. Fast. He didn't need the visor to know who it was. The hunt had begun. Okay, Uraraka-san. Go. Stick to the plan. Use the west staircase. It's the furthest from his current position. Stay silent. Got it. Be careful, Deku-kun. She whispered back, and like a ghost, she detached from him and vanished into the shadows of a side corridor. Izuku was alone. He flattened himself against the wall, his breathing slow and even. He was a rock in a stream, waiting for the torrent. The sound of footsteps grew louder, more frantic. Not the steady patrol of a guard, but the eager pounding of a predator. He rounded the corner. Bakugo stood at the far end of the long corridor, his grenade gauntlets gleaming in the dim light. The air crackled around him. DKU! He roared, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. I knew you'd come crawling in here. No more running. No more tricks. You and me. Right here, right now. Izuku's visor was already working, painting Bakugo's form with data. It highlighted the sweat glands on his palms, tagged his gauntlets as primary threat, and began drawing faint, predictive arcs showing his most likely lines of attack. Objective: stall. Evade. Misdirect. Do not engage directly. Instead of answering, Izuku turned and sprinted down the hallway in the opposite direction. Coward! Bakugo bellowed, his frustration boiling over. He launched himself forward with a series of controlled explosions from his palms, propelling himself down the corridor like a human rocket. The chase was on. Izuku's movements were not a panicked flight. They were a calculated retreat. He flowed through the building like water, his Aizawa-trained parkour turning the office environment into his personal playground. He vaulted over desks, slid under partitions, and used his grappling hook to swing around corners with impossible speed and grace. Bakugo was a force of nature behind him, blasting through obstacles with raw power. Get back here! He screamed, firing a blast that obliterated a row of cubicles where Izuku had been moments before. He's running on pure aggression, Izuku murmured, his heart hammering against his ribs but his mind cold as ice. He's not thinking. He's just chasing. Good. He led Bakugo on a winding path, deeper and deeper into the building, away from the 5th floor, away from Uraraka. He rounded a corner, and came face to face with a dead end, a solid brick wall. Nowhere left to run! Bakugo crowed, appearing at the end of the hall, his face twisted in a triumphant sneer. He raised his gauntlet, a malicious orange light building within it. Izuku didn't panic. He fired his grappling hook straight up. The piercing anchor bit into the concrete ceiling. He hit the retraction button and was yanked upwards, his feet leaving the floor just as Bakugo unleashed a massive explosion. Boom! The entire floor shook. The wall where Izuku had been standing was blasted to rubble. The heat washed over him, but the Aegis suit's thermal lining held. He hung from the ceiling for a moment before swinging himself into the gaping hole Bakugo had just created in the wall, landing silently in the adjacent room. In the monitor room, the students were speechless. Holy crap, Bakugo's going nuts! Kirishima exclaimed. But Midoriya, he's so fast. He's not even fighting back, he's just flowing, Tsuyu observed, her finger on her chin. All Might watched, his fists clenched. This was not the fight he'd expected. It was a masterclass in evasion. The boy is not fighting the storm, he's navigating it. Izuku continued his retreat, but now with a new purpose. He led Bakugo into a large, open-plan office filled with desks and filing cabinets. He's predictable, Izuku whispered to himself, his visor tagging multiple attack vectors. He favors a big right hook after a feint. Let's test it. He ducked behind a large metal filing cabinet. Bakugo, seeing his chance, charged in. I've got you! He feinted left, then swung his right arm around, just as Izuku's analysis had predicted. A massive explosion detonated against the cabinet. But Izuku was already gone. He had used the feint as his cue, sliding around the other side of the cabinet. This time, however, he didn't just run. As Bakugo's vision was momentarily obscured by his own explosion, Izuku fired his left gauntlet. A large, white projectile shot out and splattered against Bakugo's right leg. In seconds, it expanded and hardened into a solid block of capture foam, anchoring Bakugo's leg to the floor. What the? Bakugo roared, stumbling. He looked down at the foam in disbelief, then back up with murder in his eyes. You little! He blasted the foam with a small, precise explosion, shattering it. But it had cost him precious seconds. Seconds Izuku used to put more distance between them. He had confirmed it. He could outthink Bakugo's instincts. Uraraka-san status? He whispered into his comm. 4th floor. No sign of Ida. It's all clear, she replied, her voice breathless. Good. I'm on the 3rd floor, east wing. I'm going to draw him into the central atrium. Get ready. Izuku ran towards the center of the building. The atrium was a large, open space, 5 stories high, with walkways ringing each floor. It was a death trap. There was nowhere to hide. Tired of running, Deku? Bakugo's voice echoed from the hallway behind him. He stepped into the atrium, his expression murderous. He had Izuku cornered. No, Kaken, Izuku said, turning to face him. I'm done running from you. For the first time, he stood his ground. This was the crux of the plan. He had led Bakugo away from the objective, analyzed his fighting style, and proven he could be countered. Now, he needed to hold him here. Finally decided to fight? Bakugo sneered, planting his feet. Big mistake. He lunged. But Izuku had already mapped this fight in his head a dozen times. He didn't try to block. He didn't try to punch back. He moved. Using his boot thrusters for micro-adjustments, he dodged Bakugo's initial right swing. He sidestepped the follow-up left, the blast of hot air singing past his ear. His visor was a storm of data, predictive lines, threat level indicators, timers. It was overwhelming, but the 10 months of Nizu's training had prepared him for this cognitive load. He was reading the fight 2 steps ahead. Stand still! Bakugo roared, his frustration mounting. It was like trying to punch smoke. Izuku used his grapple line not as an escape, but as a pivot, firing it into a pillar and using it to swing around Bakugo, forcing the explosive team to constantly reorient himself. He threw a volley of smoke pellets from his belt, filling the atrium with thick, vision-obscuring clouds. Cowardly tricks! Bakugo screamed, unleashing a wide-arc explosion to clear the air. While Bakugo was blind, Izuku had already grappled up to the walkway on the 2nd floor. The villain is getting angry, Kaken, Izuku called down, his voice echoing in the large space. An angry fighter is a sloppy fighter. That did it. The taunt, coming from Deku, was the final straw. Bakugo's face contorted in pure, unadulterated rage. You think you can look down on me? He screamed, his voice cracking. He aimed his gauntlet, not at Izuku, but at the empty space beside him. You want to see a trick? He reached over with his other hand and pulled a small pin from the side of the massive grenade-shaped device. In the monitor room, All Might's blood ran cold. Bakugo, my boy, stop. You'll kill him. He'll be fine if he dodges. Bakugo screamed back, his voice a raw shriek of fury. A torrent of volatile, nitroglycerin-like sweat, stored up over the course of the battle, flooded the gauntlet's interior. Bakugo aimed. St. Louis. Smash! A beam of pure, concentrated explosive energy, far larger and more powerful than anything he had produced before, erupted from his gauntlet. It wasn't a blast. It was a cannon shot. It tore through the air, obliterating the section of walkway Izuku was standing on and blasting a 10-foot hole in the building's exterior wall. The entire building groaned under the force of the impact. The students in the monitor room gasped in horror. Izuku had anticipated an attack, but not this. The sheer scale of it was beyond his predictions. His visor had screamed a crimson-red warning, and he had reacted on pure instinct, firing a grapple line and swinging away just as the blast hit. He was thrown through the air, the shockwave catching him and slamming him brutally against a concrete pillar on the other side of the atrium. Warning: kinetic impact exceeds armor threshold. Spinal support compromised. User vital signs critical. The suit's AI blared in his ear, its calm voice a stark contrast to the screaming pain in his back. He slumped to the floor, his vision swimming. The left side of his visor was cracked, data flickering erratically. He could feel a warm wetness spreading across his back. The Aegis suit had saved his life, but it hadn't absorbed all of it. Bakugo stood in the smoke, panting, his arm trembling from the recoil. He looked at the devastation he had caused, at the huge hole in the side of the building. A flicker of something, maybe shock, maybe even fear, crossed his face before it was replaced by his usual defiant anger. See? He huffed, trying to sound confident. He dodged. He started walking toward Izuku's slumped form. It's over, Deku. Give up. You can't win. You were never meant to be here. On the floor, his body screaming in protest, Izuku pushed himself up. Pain was a signal. Learn to distinguish the pain of injury from the pain of progress. Aizawa's words echoed in his head. This was definitely the pain of injury. But he wasn't done, Uraraka-san. He wheezed into the comms, his voice barely a whisper. Now, on the 5th floor, Uraraka had been hiding outside the objective room, listening to the chaos below, her heart in her throat. When she heard Izuku's signal, she didn't hesitate. She took a deep breath, touched her fingertips together, and burst into the room. Release! She yelled. Ida, who had been meticulously role-playing as a villain, monologuing to the empty room, spun around in shock. Aha! The hero has arrived! But your foolish partner's distraction is at an end. You cannot defeat M. His speech was cut short as Uraraka slapped a hand on the massive nuclear prop. Gotcha! She then touched a large, heavy piece of debris that Bakugo's earlier blast had conveniently loosened from the ceiling. Making it weightless, she swung it like a baseball bat, sending it hurtling towards Ida. The boy, for all his speed, was caught completely off guard in the cluttered room and was knocked off his feet. Hero team wins! All Might's voice, filled with profound relief, boomed through the building. Down in the atrium, Bakugo froze mid-step. The announcement washed over him, a tide of cold, humiliating disbelief. Wins? He had Deku right here. Broken. Beaten. He had won. How could they have won? He looked up at the broken walkways, the gaping hole in the wall, the trail of destruction he had carved through the building in his obsessive pursuit. And he looked at Izuku, struggling to get to his feet, his suit cracked and smoking. He understood. It had never been a fight. It had been a diversion. The entire battle, his rage, his power, his obsession, all of it had been a tool, expertly wielded by the one person he considered worthless. He hadn't been the hunter. He had been the pawn, moved across the board in a game he didn't even know he was playing. Izuku stumbled towards him, his body screaming, but his eyes, visible through the cracked portion of his visor, held no fear. They held a quiet, devastating certainty. I won, Izuku rasped, his voice raw. Without throwing a single punch at you. I told you, Kaken. The result is all that matters. The weight of that statement, the utter, comprehensive nature of his strategic defeat, crushed Bakugo. He stood there, his gauntlets suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, his signature power feeling utterly useless. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and made a fool of by Deku. His world, already fractured, finally shattered.